Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing the G4560 with an RX 480 8GB. My objective here is try to get 60 frames per second constant, which will be difficult, but we'll give it a try. I'm using Windows 10 64-bit, and for some reason my RAM was able to get to 2400 MHz on my B150M motherboard, which has a limit of 2133 MHz. With XMP I was able to get to 2400, that's why it's kinda weird to me how I got to the higher frequency, but it should be a little better than using 2133. I'm also using 16 gigs of RAM. I'm using 4 sticks of 4 gigs of RAM, again right now 2400 MHz, since a lot of people told me that on some games 16 gigs was necessary, that 8 wasn't enough, and some of the stutters were happening due to that. And at the end of the video I'll just tell you if 16 gigs makes a difference on all the games I tested here. So first, Battlefield 1 multiplayer. I'll just be using 1080p with ultra settings except mesh quality. I kept that on medium since it can help with the CPU, so it's a good idea to keep it on medium, the rest cranked up. And when I first jumped into a match, I was getting a very low frame rate. It was below 40 frames per second, but there was a lot going on. Some tanks, some people shooting each other, explosions, fire. After I died in that part, the game was up to 60 again, dropping as slow as 45 for what I could see. Still very playable, but on some very demanding moments it can drop to 30, which is annoying if you're playing competitively, but so far you can still play just fine. GTA 5, I'll be doing 1080p using a mix between high and very high with tessellation turned off, and again I'm trying to get 60 frames per second. I was able to do so using this CPU, using NVIDIA cards. Unfortunately with the RX 470 I wasn't able to, and on this one the same happens. I'm unable to get 60 is constant when I'm exploding cars or flying with a helicopter. That's why I'm showing you those specific areas. While flying the chopper you will get drops below 60, and when exploding cars too, so don't expect 60 frames per second constant on this one. It's still very playable, but you can get a better experience with a different build. The Witcher 3, I'll be doing 1080p using a mix between high and ultra. The shadows, grass density, foliage, visibility range and detail level will be all on high, the rest on ultra. Hairworks turn off. And on ambient occlusion I'll be using SSAO. And my objective here again is trying to get 60s, so I'll be just going into Novigrad and you'll see as I get closer and closer to the city that the CPU usage will start rising, and you'll be very surprised that the game maintains 60 frames per second at the first half of Novigrad. Then when you get onto a more dense in detail area, closer to the center of the city, you'll see that it drops below 60 frames per second to around 40-45. Outside the city is fine. This is the most CPU bound area that I know of, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, not bad at all.
Bandit!
Degeneracy, the downfall of civilization, moral decay.
Oh. Beg your pardon?
Fallout 4, I'll be doing 1080p using TAA and 16 times anisotropic filtering. For the settings, I'll be using a mix between high and ultra. The God rays will be on low, the shadow distance on high, and I'll turn off screen space reflections, the rest all cranked up. And so far, like it always happens with Fallout 4, I'm on Diamond City, going down the elevator, and while looking into the distance, you'll see it drops below 60 frames per second. The game won't go to 60 frames per second all the time, but with mods it should be possible to fix this, according to some people that I talked to. I couldn't test those mods just yet, but I'll be taking a look at them soon and hopefully update the video. But so far, without doing any tweaks, the game won't maintain 60 frames per second constant on areas that have this issue, which are many across the whole game. So yeah, if you're fine with 40-45 frames per second at the worst, it's not bad at all.
You won't regret it.
Move along.
Win the game, buy a swatter.
Shop in safety. No synths allowed at the surplus.
Self-prescribed chems, as recommended by me.
Nothing to see here.
Hitman, I'll be doing 1080p using DirectX 12, since I had a better experience using that with the RX 480. And here I'll be using medium level of detail, shadow maps on high, and shadow resolution down to medium, the rest all cranked up. And I'm playing on the Marrakesh level, a place that has a huge number of NPCs, transparencies, all that kind of stuff. So it's a big hit to the CPU. And as you can see, I'm unable to hit 60 frames per second on those open areas full of detail, but on other levels that are smaller you should be able to hit 60s, but on this big level it's kind of impossible.
I could just about strangle you. Stomach cramps. What kind of idiot eats shellfish from a buffet?
Relax, man. I hired a local cameraman. Freelance guy. Hello?
Oh well, if you're not Barry Tyler, then I am. Are you nuts?
Fire! Give him all you got!
Just Cause 3, I'll be doing 1080p using pretty much very high settings, which is the maximum, but I only lowered the level of detail factor from very high to medium, so it helped the CPU a little bit. And on this game in particular, I found that the stutters weren't gone using 16 gigs of RAM, as you can see on screen. While there are explosions or you're fighting and all that kind of stuff, the frame rate drops due to the CPU, mostly, since I tested this with an i7 4790 in the past and it was a much better experience, to be expected, but the CPU is a big factor. You'll see many stutters while I'm moving fast through the map. A lot of people told me, hey, that's due to the RAM. As you can see, the stutters still happen using 16 gigs of RAM. The CPU is not the best one, of course, it's a $60 CPU, 2 cores, 4 threads. What I notice now that I'm using 16 gigs is that the game's stutters are way less pronounced. They are not as aggressive, but they'll still happen. But for a $60 CPU, this is not bad at all. Overwatch, I'll be doing in 1080p with the maximum settings, everything cranked up to the highest possible, and well, not much to say about this one, it runs just fine. It seems to be just GPU bound, for the most part. The CPU will sometimes make the GPU not be used at 100%, which can be normal in some more intensive situations, and due to the high frame rate, I'm over 100 frames per second. On those moments, the CPU might struggle a little, maintaining a high frame rate, but as long as you want to be over 60, which is the title of this video, you won't have an issue on this one.
Let me get you patched up. Let's get you back out there.
I am rocking this objective.
Where does it hurt? You needed a doctor? Let me get you patched up.
Batman Arkham Knight, I'll be using the maximum settings on 1080p. The only things that I turned off were the GameWorks features, chromatic aberration and film grain. What to say about this game? Well, 16 gigs of RAM on this game made the stutters less bad, for saying it in some way. They weren't as rough as before, like on Just Cause 3. Also using higher end CPUs, this happened to me, so it seems to be a problem with the game itself, since more RAM made the game more stable, but it didn't fix it. I mean, I'm using 16 gigs, remember that. But I won't deny it runs better than before, even by lowering the settings down to the 720p resolution plus low settings. It doesn't matter, the game won't run at 60 frames per second constant.
Soldiers, bombs, tear gas clouds, tanks absolutely freaking everywhere. Crazy poison ivy pollen, not to mention the bat driving around in his personal war machine all night. Next time...
Assassin's Creed Unity, I'll be doing in 1080p using pretty much high settings with ultra high textures and SSAO. I avoided all the NVIDIA technologies on this one. And well, as you can already see, the game is below 60 frames per second pretty much all the time. There are a lot of NPCs on screen, a lot going on, and 2 cores and 4 threads is just not enough for 60s. So this game seems to take advantage of more threads on your CPU, but this one isn't enough for 60s. Just put a 40 frames per second cap and you'll be fine.
Qu'est-ce qui a pu causer cette agitation?
Faut pas m'inquiéter.
CSGO, I'll be doing in 1080p using max settings and 4x MSAA, FXAA disabled. And well, I'm trying just a deathmatch match and I'm over 120 frames per second. But one thing to keep in mind, I saw that on Nvidia cards this game had higher frame rates using this CPU, so I don't know what's going on there. But so far the game is still playable and it's over 120 frames per second. Watch Dogs 2, I'll be doing 1080p using a mix between high and ultra pretty much, with some stuff turned off. You'll see that I'm using temporal filtering, that's because I'm trying to get 60 frames per second, and you'll notice that I'm unable to hit 60s constant, especially when the police is chasing me. The GPU usage is quite low, it's below 90%, and due to that I'm pretty much unable to hit 60s. It's due to a CPU limitation, the CPU is at pretty much 100% all the time. One other thing that I noticed is that this game was running much better with more than 8 gigs of RAM. It's not using more than 7.2 as far as I could see, but the status that I got in the past when running the game for the first time were completely gone. It was much more stable, so I suggest having more than 8 gigs of RAM for this one. It's much more stable with more RAM for what I could see, but still this is a CPU limitation problem here. Still playable though, just cap it at 30 to 40 frames per second, something like that, and you'll be fine.
I'll try and spin him. Moving to block him? We don't have a shot here, on the move. We're gonna clip him.
Squad, we got a patrol SUV in pursuit of suspect.
Rise of the Tomb Raider, I'll be using 1080p on a mix between medium and high, pretty much, using DirectX 12 since that runs better, at least for me. DirectX 11 was a stuttery mess due to the CPU it seems, but so far I was kinda surprised with the results here. It was over 50 frames per second pretty much all the time, and sometimes hitting over 60 on some open areas. This level that I chose is very CPU intensive. You'll see that the CPU is at 100% pretty much all the time. So yeah, so far I'm surprised with this one, but just 50 to 60, and if you want a more stable frame rate, just cap it at 50 or something very close to that, so the CPU doesn't get stressed that much and you have a more consistent frame rate.
Lara, I'm sorry if Sophia was less than welcoming.
I understand. I'm just glad you were there to vouch for me.
My people have spent decades fighting outsiders. It's not an easy habit to break. See if you can lend a hand with the preparations. A little hard work would go a long way towards building trust.
I'll see what I can do. They will likely come from the air.
Forza Horizon 3, I'll be doing 1080p, and on the advanced settings I lower the shadows, the reflections, the windshield reflection quality, the static geometry quality, the dynamic geometry quality, and well, also the mirror quality and the world car level of detail. By lowering those settings I was able to hit 60 frames per second, not all the time, but it was very consistent compared to other games, and for this game it seems to be beneficial to have more than 8 gigs of RAM, As you'll see in the video itself, the RAM usage will be over 9 gigabytes, but the game with 8 gigabytes it was still running good. But yeah, so far it was at 60 frames per second, and on some turns here and there, when there are many cars on screen, but it's just for a few seconds, and the game is very smooth. My personal suggestion here, just cap it at 60, so the CPU doesn't have to do unnecessary work. But yeah, so far, not bad at all. And finally Doom, I'll be using Vulkan on 1080p with the highest setting, not the Ultra preset. I'm using Ultra with 2 options on HITMAN, which are shadows and textures. So this is the maximum of maximum settings. And the game was pretty much running over 60 frames per second all the time. It looks great and it's a lot of fun. You should try it out. So conclusion, the G4560 on many games it was unable to maintain 60 frames per second all the time. On the ones that I was unable to hit anywhere close to 60 frames per second was GTA 5, while just flying a chopper it was below 60 and exploding cars was even worse. Fallout 4, on many systems I'm unable to hit 60s. I'm unable to hit 60s on many areas of the game. Hitman, again, on Marrakesh, the most demanding map, uses a lot of CPU, impossible to maintain 60s, even using higher end CPUs it was very difficult, but on this one it's pretty much impossible, maybe on other levels. Then Just Cause 3, again, impossible to maintain 60s all the time. That game needs some work. Batman Arkham Knight, another one that needs a lot of work, is not anywhere close to 60 frames per second constant, especially while moving fast through the map. Assassin's Creed Unity, another one that is unable to hit 60s or anything close to that. It's a big open world, there are a lot of NPCs, all that kind of stuff. And then Watch Dogs 2, also, very CPU intensive game. It won't hit 60 frames per second, especially in the middle of the city chased by the police. The only games that I saw a benefit using 16 gigs of RAM were Just Cause 3, Batman Arkham Knight, Watch Dogs 2 and Forza Horizon 3. That made the stuttering in those games be less aggressive. It didn't fix the games, but it helped to get a better experience. So I highly recommend doing that if you can afford it. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.